Well, good morning. I'm MMAC President Tim Sheehy. I want to thank you for joining our weekly webcast from 11 to 12 on Tuesdays. Our mission is to develop Metro Milwaukee as a globally competitive location for businesses that deliver high-value jobs to foster a vibrant quality of life for all. This program provides actionable insights to the challenges and opportunities we all face in developing the region as a better place to live, work, play, and learn. Today, we'll get an update on the region's current health prospects under COVID-19 from Dr. John Raymond, President of the Medical College of Wisconsin. Then we'll look ahead at our economic health from both a business and individual perspective through a conversation with Nick Bauer, Managing Partner of Operose Advisors, and Jim Popp, President and CEO of Johnson Financial Group. Two very seasoned professionals with extensive investment and banking experience. This webcast is powered by Aurora WDC, a Madison-based market and intelligence firm. They help us make faster and smarter decisions. Visit them at Aurora WDC. I also want to recognize our sponsor, ERC Midwest, which provides decontamination and disinfection services. As businesses open and welcome employees and customers back, ERC President Mike Maltesta has this note. Thanks to the MMAC and its members for the work you've done, figuring your way through unknowns of this pandemic, staying informed, keeping people upbeat and positive about the future of our businesses, our employees, their families, and our entire community. Although the work is far from over, it's work you've proven you're ready to do. So visit ERC Midwest at ercmidwest.com/MMAC to find out about their programs for a disinfection certificate and discounts. If you have questions during the program, please submit them. We devote the last 20 minutes to answering as many questions as we can. So let's start with an update on our COVID-19 status with Dr. Raymond.
Thanks, Tim, and good morning, everyone. And before I start, I've got 4 data slides. I want to make sure everyone knows it appears that the DHS website is reconciling some of their reporting data. So I've used the most recently available data that we feel comfortable with. In most cases, that's from yesterday, but on the last slide, I only have data going through Sunday. So I'll start with diagnostic testing. Thus far, we've administered over 350,000 tests in Wisconsin and 70,000 in Milwaukee. And of those, we've had 21,000 positive tests in the state for a 5.9% positive rate and a little over 8,900 in Milwaukee for a 12.5% positive rate. And I do want to note that this positive rate is important because ideally we'd like to see that crawl down below 5%. And if you just look at the recent daily reporting requirements for Wisconsin, we've been below 5% now for about 10 days. And in Milwaukee, even though that 12.5% number seems high, we've actually been significantly lower than that for the last few days. So if we can get down under 5%, I think we can be very comfortable with the data. The number of tests reported yesterday was lower than we've seen recently at 7,400. And the previous daily high total was almost 16,000. And we've been averaging about 11,000 reported tests per day. Our capacity continues to grow now to over 15,500 with 62 laboratories currently certified to test with 26 planning to test. And in terms of positive tests, we've had a couple of very light days, Sunday and Monday. Yesterday with 203 reported cases in Wisconsin for only a 2.7% positive rate and 98 in Milwaukee. And although we don't have the positive rate for yesterday, the 7-day average for positive tests in Milwaukee is only 6.3%. So we're approaching that critical 5% threshold. Next slide, please. We're also approaching about 3,000 hospitalizations in Wisconsin since the beginning of the pandemic, with 2,860 yesterday. Now that's a 13.6% of patients testing positive who've ended up being hospitalized. And I do want to draw your attention to that because, again, I think things are improving for us. At the beginning of the pandemic, if you had a positive test, you were 30% likely to be hospitalized. And the percentage of hospitalizations for the number of positive tests has continued to go down. And I think that's good news, probably emblematic that as our testing capacity has grown, we've been able to diagnose people earlier in their illnesses and maybe even some asymptomatic individuals. I also believe that we know a whole lot more about how to give high quality supportive care to patients with COVID-19 and to triage them appropriately into the hospital, to home, or into intensive care settings. Now, we have very adequate capacity of Wisconsin hospitals, and we've never exceeded the capacity, and I would say non-surge capacity of our hospitals to take care not only of COVID-19 patients, but anyone that may need services. So yesterday we had 322 inpatients, and that's stable. 110 of those were in the intensive care unit, and that's also stable. And we had nearly 400 intensive care unit beds readily available, and that increased somewhat from late last week. In terms of intensive care unit and ventilator capacity, those also are very adequate and have been stable. And in terms of personal protective equipment, as we've said many times in the past on these webinars, the supply chain for PPE continues to be problematical, but most hospitals now have been able to resume some semblance of normal activity with stable PPE. And the most critical needs are goggles, gowns, and it does look like N95 masks may become somewhat of a problem here in southeastern Wisconsin, and we'll take a look at that as we go through. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of deaths, we've had 646 deaths in Wisconsin and 300 in Milwaukee. And as many of you know, there is a racial predilection for death with COVID-19, predominantly affecting African American, Latino, and other minority groups. And I think this bears out in the numbers here, which show disproportionate percentages of African American deaths, with 161 deaths, or 25% in Wisconsin being African American, and 129 deaths, or 43% of the deaths in Milwaukee County. Hispanic and Latino, 67 or 10.4% in Wisconsin, and 35 or 11.7% in Milwaukee. And whites still constitute the majority of deaths in Wisconsin at 68.1% and at 43% in Milwaukee. Now, these doubling times are from Sunday, but they look good. In Wisconsin, we're out to 22 days, and in Milwaukee, 23.5 days. And the daily growth rate of positive tests averaged over 7 days, also from Sunday, continue to go down. So we're at 1.7% in Wisconsin and 1.8% in Milwaukee. And the trend has consistently been to go downward. You'll recall that early in the pandemic, the daily growth rates were between 30 and 35%. On the other hand, the numerator's much larger, and so even a small percent growth each day still indicates that we have a significant number of cases. And to just put that into perspective, our average number of new reported COVID-19 positive cases has been about 500 per day over the last 10 days. And in some good news, the reproductive number, or the measure of contagiousness, also has gone down, and it was below 1.0 for 6 consecutive days through Sunday. And the last recorded numbers were 0.84 for Wisconsin and 0.76 for Milwaukee. If we could go to the final slide, please. This slide basically shows you the progress that we've made in terms of reducing that reproductive number, the R naught, or the measure of contagiousness of COVID-19 at a given place at a given time. And you can see moving from the left to the right, for Milwaukee County shown in tan and Wisconsin shown in blue, we had a very significant decrease in the reproductive number early in the pandemic. And we dipped below 1 briefly in early April, then went back up over 1 and sort of hovered around 1 until the 6 days before this past Sunday, when we were consistently below 1, both in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. And I really look forward to seeing that trend continue. And I'm hoping for that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tim.
Thanks, Dr. Raymond. While we're on the R value, one question I have for you. I saw today that it still stubbornly remains above 1 kind of across the United States, and there seems to be some surging. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. I think some of the surge may be related to increased testing capacity and a focus on congregate living situations. Some may be workplace hotspots, but we're also seeing the spread of COVID-19 into communities that didn't have many cases before. As we said many times on these webinars, COVID-19 doesn't respect state borders and county lines. And eventually, if somebody comes into your neighborhood or into your community that has COVID-19, that you can have a rapid increase. And I just want to highlight the importance of continued diligence with good hand washing, good pulmonary hygiene, and wearing those face coverings out in public, because those are our best tools right now.
So as you look ahead, Dr. Raymond, is it fair to say across at least the U.S., we're going to have a flatter, but maybe a longer curve to get to the point where we get that R value below 1?
Yeah, I think that's true, Tim. And, you know, we should say this is what we wanted to have happen.
Yeah.
We're trying to make sure that we don't have a surge that overwhelms the capacity of our healthcare systems, like what happened in New York and New Orleans early in the pandemic. I think we've been very successful here and in many other communities, although Atlanta is struggling a little bit right now. But I think as a country, we're doing pretty well. And we're just buying time until we can get a vaccine or better treatments.
So as you look ahead across at least the summer months here in Metro Milwaukee, what do you see as your biggest concern and your biggest point of optimism?
Well, people are fatigued. The weather's nice. We're lonely. We want to interact with other people. All those things are understandable. My biggest concern is that too many people will let their guard down in situations in which they may not be able to completely socially distance or protect themselves.
And kind of your biggest point of optimism looking forward?
I like that R number being below 0 or below 1, and I'd like to see it continue. Although to extinguish the pandemic where we are right now with 500 cases per day, you'd really like it to get down below 0.6 or 0.5 to see real progress.
Great. Thank you for the update, Dr. Raymond, and I know you'll stick around for questions and appreciate you keeping us current and looking forward when it comes to the health impacts of COVID-19. We're going to shift the discussion now, and I want to bring Nick Bauer back in as the managing partner of Operose Advisors, and we're going to talk to Nick a little bit about the economic outlook and providing some insights over the course of the next couple months. And Nick, maybe the starter question for you is just share a little bit of your background and tell us a little bit about Operose Advisors.
Yeah, so Operose Advisors is a registered investment advisor. We're based here right downtown Milwaukee on Water and Mason. So we see the direct impact of the slowdown out our window every single day when I come to the office. But our primary client base is really individuals and smaller institutions with assets between $1 million and $50 million. That's the part of the market that we service.
Have you seen a more challenging time in your career in terms of looking at the market and managing your customers' portfolio?
Well, it's challenging in a different way in the sense that it's not an event that was created by the financial markets or people being irresponsible as it relates to managing risk or leverage. It's really a crisis that's driven from a healthcare perspective. And that in itself is challenging in terms of how you manage people's reactions to what's going on in the financial markets, the length of the economic recovery and what that might look like, and really how do you build portfolios and manage risks as a result of what's going on from a healthcare perspective.
Nick, you've got a couple slides that you prepared, and I think it would be helpful just to walk through those and share with us what they portend or how you view the economic outlook in terms of the fundamentals, the recovery, what it might look like, to give folks some points to think about.
Yeah, I would say the biggest question we get from clients today, and even going back a couple of weeks, was what is this recovery going to look like? And if you go back to the third and the fourth week of March when things were at its worst, depending upon which news channel you turned on, you heard a lot of people talking about, a U-shaped recovery or a recovery that looks more like a square root. But we would say today, you really have to bifurcate the recovery into two segments. One is a market recovery, and the second being an economic recovery, and they're both very, very different. And I'll start with the market recovery because that's been the most acute to date. It's one that's really been supported by an artificial buyer in the market. I think most people back in March would have tried to convince you that the markets will exhibit a U-shaped recovery, but if we look at the markets today, particularly the U.S. equity markets, I think we can safely say the verdict is in, and we've had a V-shaped recovery. And if you can go to the next slide, that V-shaped recovery really has nothing to do with what's going on from an economic perspective. It has everything to do with what's happening in terms of global government stimulus. And this is not new to the markets. This is really a page out of the 2008-2009 playbook, albeit on steroids. So what we've seen to date is about a $3 trillion federal relief package from Congress and the U.S. Treasury, which has been direct cash to businesses and individuals, to state and local governments, as well as healthcare institutions. And then maybe more importantly, is you've seen the Federal Reserve step in and expand their balance sheet to today, which is about $6.5 trillion and growing. But what the Fed has done today, which they didn't do in 2008 and 2009, is they've really set the stage for unlimited buying power, not just in U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, but they've gone further out into risk assets like investment-grade corporate bonds. And I think much to the surprise of most investors, have now started buying below investment-grade corporate bonds. And as of last week, when I looked, I think the Fed had purchased about $3 billion of below investment grade corporate bonds, and that is projected to go to $250 billion. But what that does is it creates an artificial buyer in the market, and it lifts all asset prices. And I think that's why you've seen such a sharp and stark reaction in the U.S. equity markets. The Fed is really trying to get people to take risk. They've lowered interest rates to zero. So for everybody that has cash in their bank account earning zero, you're looking for creative ways to get interest. And the only way you can do that is by taking on more risk. So you've had the Treasury and the Congress, you've had the Federal Reserve, and you've had central banks around the world, including the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, and the People's Bank of China, all providing massive amounts of stimulus to support the financial markets. When it comes to the economic recovery, I think it's a much different story. I think that recovery looks much more like a U. It's one that's going to be led by the healthcare community. It's going to be supported by the government, both at the national, state, and local level. And then finally, I think the business community will be following the lead of the healthcare community and the governments. There is going to be clear, in our mind, winners and losers as a result of this prolonged economic recession. There's no doubt that we're going to be in a recession Q1 and Q2, but it's just a matter of how long it takes. I mean, from our perspective, we think areas like hotels, airlines, commercial real estate, certain segments of small business like local gyms, dry cleaners, and fine dining are going to be the most hurt by a prolonged economic slowdown or stoppage. And then those areas that have more to do with stay at home, like buying a new car, consumer discretionary, primarily in the form of apparel and technology, home repair, groceries, and home fitness are going to be the real winners out of this. But it's all going to depend upon how long this economic slowdown persists. And if you can go to the next slide, please. You can see what that slow road to recovery looks like. At the top, it's really led by, as I mentioned, the healthcare community and how fast we can get some vaccines or therapeutics into the market. And I'm getting a little outside my lane, so Dr. Raymond could maybe move me back in. But I think it all has to do with what's happening from a healthcare perspective. Clearly, from a market standpoint, sentiment has changed. What went from a mentality of sell all assets at any price in March has changed, and that's all been supported by fiscal and monetary stimulus. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is U.S. equity performance as of the end of March, which is about a week after the trough in the market. The trough was actually on March 23rd. We had the fastest and steepest drawdown in history. It was 30 days, about 30%, depending upon which index you looked at. U.S. small cap stocks, I think their drawdown was 42%, but most major U.S. indices were down about 30%. If you go to the next slide, you can see we've almost fully recovered all of that performance through June 5th, which would have been last week, Friday. And if you account for yesterday's performance, most major indices in the U.S. markets were about flat year to date, which is pretty remarkable when you think about the devastation and the destruction that we've gone through from an economic perspective. Lastly, Tim, I thought what I'd touch on is another question that we get from clients is, where should I be investing today? And part of what we try to encourage clients to think about is when you come out of these big events or large downturns, what tends to happen is what's worked over the last 10 years tends not to work over the next 10 years, and there's rotation in the market. So if you look at what's worked over the last 10 years, it's been U.S. large cap stocks versus U.S. small cap stocks. It's been U.S. stocks versus international stocks, and it's been growth stocks versus value stocks. And if you turn to the next slide, please, what you'll see is the top 5 constituents in the S&P 500 as of April 30th. And you can see the top 5 constituents in that index, which is a broadly used index for most investors, made up 26% of the index. So you may think you're buying a well-diversified portfolio, but in fact, there's a lot of concentration in the top 5 names. And not just concentration in names, but we would say concentration in sector and industry. So the top 5 names at the end of April were Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Facebook. That presents a lot of risk to investors that don't really understand the index construction. And it's those companies in the technology space, particularly large cap technology, that have really worked over the last 10 years. So we would encourage investors to think about that. We're at a point of all-time high of concentration in that index, and I would suspect that we may see some of that turn over the next 10 years. And then if you go to the next slide, which is my last slide, the same holds true for growth and value. Over the last 10 years, growth has dramatically outperformed, growth stocks have dramatically outperformed value stocks. And all you need to know about this slide is when the blue line is at the top part of the page, growth is dramatically outperforming value. And when the blue line is towards the bottom of the page, value is dramatically outperforming growth. And you can see the spread between growth and value today is where it was during the tech bubble in 1999. And for those of you on the webinar that were around in 1999, you understand what the aftermath of that looked like if you were overweighted to technology. So we would encourage clients to think about rotation in their portfolios, value versus growth, small versus large, international versus US. And I'll pause there and happy to take some questions.
Sorry, I had my mic muted there. So as you look ahead, we keep talking about the new normal with COVID-19. What does the new normal look like for an investor? Are there things that you should shy away from? Are there things that you think are going to come to the forefront?
Yeah, we try not to think in the sense of a new normal, because every time that phrase, I think it leads you down a path of making mistakes, whether it's your personal portfolio or you sit as a trustee on an institutional portfolio. Our belief is that over the long run, and for most investors that have a long-term time horizon, it's really the old rules that will still apply. I think stocks will outperform bonds. I think private assets will outperform stocks, and that it all revolves around asset allocation and proper risk management. Now, within that, there's going to be certain winners and losers, as I mentioned. But as far as portfolio structure, I wouldn't define it as a new normal.
So as you look ahead, Nick, what do you see as the biggest threat to the U.S. economy rebounding?
Yeah, I mentioned that from a market perspective, we've had a V-shaped recovery to date. I think the biggest threat is that we get a resurgence of COVID in the fall and the winter, and that V-shaped recovery turns into a capital W. And, we have another large drawdown in the market because we're forced to shut down or slow down again in the winter months. That's probably worst case scenario in my mind.
And then what would be the best positive surprise looking ahead?
Well, certainly, I think it has to come from the healthcare community. I mean, any sort of accelerated vaccine that could deal with coronavirus and the COVID-19 problem, I think that would provide a real nice floor for investors to give them some confidence. And then when you look at the amount of liquidity in the system today, to use a real technical phrase, I think you could have some rocket fuel behind the equity markets. I checked this morning, and when you look at money market fund balances across institutions and retail, we're sitting at 4.4 trillion of cash on the sidelines. So if you can get a solution from a healthcare standpoint, and then you can get governments to relax some of the restrictions, I think you'll see businesses getting back to work pretty quickly. And there's a lot of liquidity to go around. I think individuals and businesses aren't going to stand for earning zero on their money market accounts. They're going to look for ways to invest that cash, whether it's in people, equipment, or in risk assets. And that's going to be some real fuel for the economy.
And then one last question for you before we bring Jim in. I think up until maybe a week ago or the last jobs report, we had, in a sense, wiped out all the gains that had been made, job gains over the last decade. As you look out ahead, of course, across the next 6 months or so, what do you see happening in the job market?
Well, again, I think it depends upon how quickly we can reopen, particularly on the small business side. When you look at a lot of the job losses, it tended to be in the service industry, those individuals that were working for small businesses, whether it was a restaurant or a hotel chain, bringing those people back to work is largely dependent upon, what the news that comes out of the healthcare community, and then the relaxing of some of the restrictions from a government standpoint. I hope that happens sooner than later, because I look out my window every day in downtown Milwaukee, and it breaks my heart to see nobody down here, going to restaurants and going to the hotels. So the sooner we can get back to that, I think we'll all be better off.
Great, thanks very much. I appreciate the overview, and I know you're going to stick around for questions. So Jim, let's bring you in. As I introduced you again earlier, President and CEO of Johnson Financial Group. Why don't you tell us first off a little bit about Johnson Financial Group?
Sure, that's great. Thanks, Tim. Sorry, I dropped off for a minute. My computer, of course, rebooted 5 minutes into this, and so if I'm looking a little frazzled, it's because I was desperately trying to get back on this technology. But technology, right? So Johnson Financial Group, we're the largest privately held bank financial institution in the state of Wisconsin. We run a banking business in the commercial, retail, and private banking business, with a great mortgage business as well. Again, thanks to PPP, we're a little over $6 billion in assets now in the banking business, and we run a wealth and investment advisory business that's a little over $13 billion in assets under administration and management, as well as our insurance agency, which is one of the top 10 in the state that size. So full service banking and financial services business in the state of Wisconsin and Arizona.
So you're lending across a wide portfolio of companies. Jim, can you talk about, at least from the corporate end, what are you hearing from your clients, and what differences are you hearing maybe between different industries that you're banking?
Sure. Obviously for all of us, March 16th hit, and we all kind of had to figure out what was going to happen next, and everyone kind of shut down, and it was a couple of months of really figuring out what the footing was going to look like. Our manufacturing clients had backlogs going in, and so they continued, many of them, they continued to work and continued to produce as they had before the crisis hit. Those in the service sector obviously were shut down. So we're getting back to a little bit now of feeling out some footing and feeling a rhythm in terms of the business community. PPP certainly helped smooth the way a little bit for customers along the way, and gave a little bit of cover from a liquidity standpoint.
And so as we talk about the PPP program, the initial tranche came out, and now they've done some retooling of it. Can you talk about how that's impacted your customers?
Sure. The initial tranche was a little bit of a tidal wave for everybody. We all had about 48 hours notice of what was actually going to happen, and since then, the last several weeks have been kind of change after change after change. The good news is the intent, I think, was very good, and the value it created for our customers has been really well received. The new changes of late are extending the term of PPP. That ought to allow our customers to use the proceeds more effectively than they could have in the past under the original term, and seek forgiveness at a higher rate, we believe, and cover more expenses than they thought they were going to be able to cover. So a lot remains to be seen in terms of the final rulings on PPP, but I think the latest changes in PPP certainly have I think been a positive for our customer base.
Yeah, I guess I've heard from other members of ours, Jim, where they're drawing on their credit line just to make sure they have the cash. Are you seeing that, and what's driving that?
Nick mentioned it in his comments. Last crisis, we saw a lot of that, and remember, the last crisis was a banking crisis, and so the real fear in the last crisis was that the banks were going to shut down lines of credits. The banks were in trouble, and the banks were going to have. This one hasn't been that. We've seen a little bit of drawing up on credit facilities, certainly for leveraged companies. We've seen a little bit of that. For the most part, we haven't seen that. We've seen a natural increase in liquidity, frankly, across our entire customer base. There's been a little bit of a flight to security in terms of cash. Our balances are up dramatically, and it's not because of drawing on lines of credit and drawing those down. We haven't seen much of that, frankly.
And what kind of an impact, Jim, have you seen from your retail customers across southeastern Wisconsin?
Yeah, I mean, the retailers are struggling. PPP was a lifesaver for a lot of our retail clients, and we don't have a huge portfolio in that space. But when you're shut down, you need every lifeline you can get. And I think getting back to reopening slowly as we are reopening, as safely as we are reopening, will be a godsend for our retail clients along the way.
And then what about your individual consumers, your individual customers? What are you seeing there?
I think everybody's feeling out what the new normal is going to look like, Tim. And on one of the prior calls, I think Joel Quadracci talked about we were in normal, and everybody wants to go to what's the new normal. There's not a new normal yet. There's a new abnormal now, and we're all kind of feeling that out a little bit from an investment standpoint, from how comfortable we are going back into businesses. We'll get to a new normal. I think it's probably 6 to 9 months out before we really feel like what that rhythm might look like for us.
Yeah, and through the eyes of your customers, Jim, your commercial industrial customers, as you look out ahead, how do you project their business growth, what's happening, how fast that may come back?
We spent a lot of time with our customer base. Frankly, it's one of the things our bankers across the board from a commercial standpoint are spending their days doing, is meeting with all of our customers and reevaluating projections and forecasts for the coming year to the best of our customers' abilities and to the best of our abilities. We don't know how things are going to come back yet, and so we're planning for a little bit of a tough run. And that's what I suspect that's going to be the biggest thing for the banks now is looking at credit losses. There'll be credit losses going forward. We're not going to have this kind of a of a market turmoil and not have some credit losses along the way. So we're working really closely with our customers. We've had some modifications to credits and deferrals of principal and interest, as everybody has. And frankly, the regulators have been a little bit more favorable on that, because that's just what we need in the country right now to get us to the other side of this.
And just to kind of a sidebar question, your employees and those that have customers, are they able to do the visits in person? Or are they doing most of this through technology like this?
Most everything we're doing is technology, Tim. Like most, I mean, we've got 1,200 associates in our company, and we've had 900 plus starting on the 17th of March working remotely. We're getting back to where we're reopening a little bit. We're getting back to, we haven't opened our branches yet for walk-in traffic, but we are going out to see customers. We're encouraging our folks to take as few people as they can to get the meetings done. But we're starting to see a little bit of that opening up. Sure.
And when do you see yourselves opening back up?
You know, we've had a skeleton crew from a branch standpoint, running our drive-throughs and keeping the branches open. We've got 40 plus branches around Wisconsin. We've had a skeleton crew running those. We'll get back to a very small reopening, maybe as early as the 22nd of June. And I'm going to say very, very small group. Our company fits in, like most, into I think thirds. We got a third of our company that says, I want to come back now, I'm ready to go, let's go. We got a third that says, I'm not coming back until there's a vaccine, I'm scared, and I don't blame people, they're scared. And we got a third in the middle that are kind of saying, just tell me what you want me to do. So we're going to be slow. I've told our team we're going to lag a little bit on some of this, because we're doing fine with remote technology and being able to serve our customers that way. So we'll lag a little bit, but we'll start, inching them in a little bit by the end of the month.
And then kind of a final question, and we'll go to questions from our audience. Jim, what are the indicators that you look for when you're, from your customers to tell you we're going to kind of come out of this U, as Nick described it, and we're on the upturn?
I think for most it's backlog. I think when they start building a little backlog, when their order books start to build a little bit, when they get a little bit of confidence in their customer base, I think our customers are feeling a little bit of pressure now. And again, sorry I missed a little bit of Nick's commentary in the beginning, but I think they're feeling a little bit of challenge with supply chain, getting supplies and getting what they need to build their book. They're having a little, obviously there's a little bit of inflation in some of the materials that they're using as well. So we're looking really hard at backlogs and looking really hard at forecasting as best you can in the next 6 to 9 months, for sure.
Great. Chris, we can bring Dr. Raymond back also. Let's go to questions from the viewers.
Sure, we did have a fair amount of questions for Dr. Raymond, but I'll start with a couple for Nick and Jim. Jim, first of all, we had a question on terminology. What do you mean by credit losses? Could you provide a little more perspective on that?
Yeah, credit losses is literally it is losses on your credit portfolio. It's we make a loan to company A and we have to charge it off. I think that's in a downturn like this, we will see credit losses across the entire industry, and losses on credits be a significant part of the challenge as we go forward.
Question for both Nick and Jim about the $600 unemployment enhancement. Is that a good thing overall, or are there some downsides to it?
We were just talking about that in the office this morning. I think what the government did in terms of enhancing unemployment short term is what needed to be done. We really needed to take care of those employees that lost their job for no reason. To step up and provide those enhanced benefits, I think really was the right thing to do. But at some point, I think you got to incentivize people to go back to work. I don't know when the right time is to scale back the enhanced benefits. That's above my pay grade, but I think in the short run, enhancing the benefits was certainly worthwhile.
I would tell you anecdotally, we're hearing from our customers the same thing. Where it was the right thing to do, and it served a purpose. But now we literally have customers saying, "I'd love to get somebody back, but they can make a little more. They can make a little more staying home." And you know, that's you can dispute whether that's the right wage or not. But getting back to full employment and getting back to a more robust employment is going to need that.
And then Nick, given all the technology everybody's using to communicate more so virtually than ever, investment in 5G technology, what do you see as the future for that?
Well, certainly it's coming. You know, 5G specifically is a little bit outside of our core area of expertise, but when you think about just how businesses leverage technology today versus even what they did 6 months ago, it's night and day. I mean, I think about our boutique investment advisory firm, and we had to do some things immediately and on the fly that in retrospect really enhance the way we do business and will probably change the way we do business on a go-forward basis. So a good example of that is we have clients nationally. So we have clients in Virginia, Florida, you know, Texas, California, and myself or somebody in our office used to go see those folks, you know, 2 or 3 times a year. We'll probably still go see them in person, but that might only be 1 time a year. And then the other 2 meetings will be like we're doing today via Zoom video conference. And that's really going to change the way we do business. It's going to save in terms of time. It's going to save. It's going to enhance our productivity, and it's going to be a cost savings to us on the travel and expense budget. So I think, you know, if there's any silver lining to come out of this, is that it's businesses have really learned to embrace technology, adapt to it, and leverage it to their benefit.
Great, thank you. Question for Dr. Raymond. Actually, a lot of questions about the World Health Organization's perspective yesterday on what they called very rare transmission of the virus from asymptomatic patients, and maybe a lot of confusion and some jumping to conclusions about that. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's a very timely question. Let me start by saying that I believe that the statement made by the World Health Organization is premature, and many epidemiologists would agree. And they didn't do a particularly good job, I mean the World Health Organization, in defining whether they were talking about people that were pre-symptomatic and then later could spread the disease, or were truly asymptomatic. So again, I would encourage people to continue to wear cloth face coverings. Even the World Health Organization changed their stance about that.
Have you seen the same level of confusion about that announcement that a lot of us have?
Yes, and I completely understand the confusion, and all of us are waiting for some good news, especially the type of news where we can say, you know what, if you feel fine, you can go out and do what you want. I think it's premature to make that kind of a leap.
We also, Dr. Raymond, we also had some questions about between the protests we're seeing both in Milwaukee and around the world, and just the general sense of reopening and having fewer restrictions. Do you expect a surge now, or is it hard to say?
It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, if people are interacting with each other and shouting, there's a likelihood that somebody that's got COVID-19 might spread it to someone else. And there were, you know, literally thousands of people interacting with each other, and we're not completely able to maintain social distancing, although I did notice quite a few people wearing masks. We really won't know for another week or so. And the thing we need to understand is it may not even be the people that were protesting. Many of them were young and relatively healthy. And if they get COVID-19, they may be some of the folks that are what we would call asymptomatic spreaders. And again, with all due respect to the World Health Organization, we have to think about that. And it might even be another week or 2 after that when the secondary infections come from those folks that are relatively healthy, when they interact with elderly relatives or people that are older in their workplace.
Dr. Raymond, maybe I'm going to ask you this question and then ask Nick and Jim to jump in on the economic and business end. But look out ahead and handicap a little bit this, and it's a tough question, the development of a vaccine. So I want to ask you kind of what, as we look ahead over the next 6-12 months, what that looks like. And then I want Nick and Jim to respond to what you have to say about the prospects of a vaccine potentially coming on?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I mean, obviously, all of us hope for an effective vaccine as soon as possible. And what I would say is that we've talked about this before. It takes about, in the US, 12 years to do the work that's required to have a vaccine marketed. And that involves preclinical, clinical, regulatory, manufacturing, quality control, distribution, all those things. And we're trying to compress a 12-year process into 12 months. Now, having said that, with Operation Warp Speed and the investments that the Gates Foundation is making, they're taking calculated risk by investing in a small number of companies and cutting lots and lots of corners, removing regulatory barriers. It isn't out of the realm of possibility that we could have a vaccine by January, but we're all going to have to accept that whatever vaccine or vaccines might come to market before then will not have been safety tested and quality control tested to the standards that we've enjoyed up to this point. And so we'll all be taking a calculated risk in some ways if we agree to take the vaccine.
And Nick, how do you respond just to that comment from an economic outlook perspective, and then Jim from just a business perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And to my comments earlier, I think any news as it relates to a potential vaccine is really going to be received by the market in a positive way. I mean, you've seen, some of on the days when just glimpses of good news come out regarding development of a vaccine, how the market responds. So if there was a vaccine that would become available for use, and we've demonstrated that it could be produced and mass distributed, I mean, I really think that, this market would be set up for a long-term up and to the right move.
I agree with that, Tim. It's amazing to me, first off, the fact that adversity leads to innovation so quickly, and that we can pull out the stops and clear some of the red tape if we really put our minds to doing it. I think Nick is right. When a vaccine becomes available, we went into this in a really strong position economically across the board. The idea of getting back to that position is not out of the realm of possibility once people feel safe moving around the country and moving in and out of places. I mean, that's going to be a huge factor for all of our customers.
Chris?
Yeah, Dr. Raymond, we had another question about the availability of antibody tests. And related to that, if you did get an antibody test and you found out that you were positive at some point, what could you do with that information, given that we may not know enough about immunity at this point?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Right now, you might have some peace of mind that you had an infection and maybe it would have explained a previous illness. You might have some measure of comfort that you might not get COVID-19 again for some period of time, but we just don't know enough about the correlation between antibodies and immunity for COVID-19. So it's pretty early. Just in terms of how useful antibody testing would be, I think in the clinical setting or for an individual, it's mainly peace of mind if you want to know. But the serological tests now that are coming on the market from the larger providers are pretty good, but they're really focused on epidemiological studies to understand the prevalence of the disease in your community more than anything else. And in my opinion, less applicable to individuals. And I actually can't think right now of a significant medical use for the serological test. It's really epidemiological. And I want to get back to what I've said multiple times before. The kits where you take a finger prick blood drop and run it through what they call a lateral flow assay, like a pregnancy test, where you get a colored bar that's either positive or negative. I don't recommend using those. They have a very high false positive rate and they're not very sensitive. Really, you need a full tube of blood drawn and to have your antibody test done at a high volume reference lab.
Dr. Raymond, another question, more in general. What can people do to overall boost their immune systems?
There's no magic answer to that. Eat a balanced diet, exercise, and do what you can to avoid things that are going to make you unhealthy, like excessive drinking or smoking.
And stay away from a crisis.
Stay away from a crisis. Good stress management.
Absolutely. We also had a question, as we've done a good job of tracking the number of people who are currently hospitalized. Do you know anything about the trends of new admissions to the hospital over the past few weeks?
Yeah, excellent question. I think that we peaked about a month and a half ago. We dipped down pretty significantly right before the safer at home order was overturned, and then came back up, but not to the levels we were at before. We've reached a plateau. There's really been no movement up or down for the last two to 3 weeks. And again, I want to stress, we're in a comfortable place in terms of capacity of our health systems. No one's had to deploy surge capacity or redirect their resources to deal with an overwhelming number of COVID-19 patients. We're still having 500 new cases a day, and even with a 10 or 13% hospitalization rate, that's a pretty significant number of patients.
Thanks, Dr. Raymond. Also had a question about whether there may be an emergence of vision issues as a new COVID-19 symptom. Are you aware of anything along those lines?
Yeah, I've heard of some, I would call rare or uncommon complaints of persistent visual difficulties. The cases that I've heard about are people that actually are recovering or have recovered from COVID-19 and have residual fatigue and some other constitutional symptoms, and they've complained about visual difficulties. My guess would be the most likely reason for that might be blood vessel problems and where the area of the optic nerve where visual processing happens in the brain might be one reason why people may have visual difficulties. We also know that you can spread COVID-19 through the eyes, and it may be that there could be residual infection there that causes inflammation. But again, I'm just speculating about the two most likely causes.
Thank you. Good question for Nick and Jim here. How would you overall characterize the sentiment of your investors and clients right now?
Jim?
I would say our customers, from a commercial banking standpoint and banking standpoint, are they're in wait and see mode right now. They, like as I said earlier, they've gotten through the first couple months of trying to figure out kind of what to do quickly. They've hit a little bit of a rhythm now it's seeing where the other shoe drops in terms of the economy. And what happens with a vaccine and some of those things. They're a little bit wait and see right now, but feeling a little bit better as we're all seeing in the markets.
And I would agree with Jim. I think sentiment has certainly changed from where it was, in late March, early April. What happened so fast, and it caught a lot of people off guard. I think, for a lot of our clients, whether they owned a business or had a family, it was, how do I manage my business and homeschool my kids? And then once we got all that figured out, we could get to some of the more financial or investment related issues. But we really, encourage clients to really take a long-term view. We do a lot of time, educating clients up front that this is kind of like being on an airplane. It's going to get turbulent from time to time, and sometimes the turbulence can be really severe. And you just have to have faith that we're going to land the plane safely. And I have every expectation that, whether it's, coming out of the healthcare community or it's going to be, through the, government oversight, when we should slow down and reopen, and then really driven by, the business leaders on the back end about, bringing people back to work and restarting this economy that, I have every expectation that, to go back to the analogy that this plane's really going to land safely.
One of the challenges, Jim and Nick, that Dr. Raymond and I have talked about over the last couple months is, as we work through this, really building employee confidence and consumer confidence. And we've done polling in April and then most recently in May. And two of the numbers that always stick out with me in April, I think it was about 77% of the folks polled were concerned they were going to get COVID or somebody they knew. Now that's dropped to 72%, but it's still a very high number. And I think it's still weighing on the employee and consumer confidence. And that's a factor you're still both seeing.
Yes, we're seeing that, and we see it. We see it as we think about return to work, and as our customers think about return to work. And I think that's why across certainly, Tim, across the MMAC members you've polled and that we've talked to, there's a large group that are saying slower the better on returning. We've figured out how to use technology and how to use remote work environments to do what we need to do for the most part in our economy. We can be slow to get back and make sure that we do it as safely as possible. I think we're all committed to that.
And same with us. We've taken a very slow approach to coming back to the office. You know, there's no upside to bringing people back early. We've really given people the option. You know, if they feel comfortable, they're more than welcome to come in a safe way, and we have some guidelines in place that help them understand, you know, some of the new procedures. And we're a small firm, a boutique business, and you know, to have those very structured procedures and rules now is a little bit foreign to us, but you know, it's for the safety of not just the employees, but those that work in the building and you know, those we come into contact with on a daily basis. But you know, we're in no rush to get back. I mean, we learned really quickly that we can operate our business, and you know, Jim can probably attest to this as well. And we can operate fully remotely, which is sort of a new paradigm for us, and one that's a little bit refreshing. So, you know, I think you know, erring on the side of caution is prudent right now.
You know, Timmy, the other thing I'll add to that, I think the thing that we don't know yet is there's going to be a percentage of our employees, of our associates in this company that don't ever come back because they will transition to remote work environments, and we're fine with that. It was a trend. It's been a trend for a long time in a lot of industries. This has accelerated that trend because what we've realized is it can work, and what our associates have realized is I kind of like it. We've got people that are very productive and very engaged and can continue to do that. I think we'll have fewer come back in the long run when this is done.
Well, knowing your wife, I know that's a trend she hopes doesn't stick with you, Jim.
That's why I'm here today.
Dr. Raymond, when you think about that same question, what's the change that you think is most likely to stick?
Yeah, well, for a large majority of our non-clinical workforce, people are they're gonna work from home. We haven't figured all of that out yet, especially because our organization really depends on local decision making by our department chairs and not central authority. So we're gonna have to work through that. But healthcare is going to change, and I think in a good way, that telehealth and digital technologies, virtual visits are going to become a major part of the way we deliver healthcare, and that's good. I think that this crisis has forced us to do things that we wanted to do for a long time and removed a lot of barriers to getting there.
And Nick, do you see this trend, just listening to Dr. Raymond, listening to Jim and other discussions? What's your sense of how this impacts the real estate market, commercial office space, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think, you know, when you look at, you know, one asset class that's probably going to be disproportionately affected more than others, you really have to start with real estate, and commercial real estate, office in particular, you know, being a subset of the overall real estate market, is probably going to be the most affected, just based on Jim's comments earlier. I mean, if you're a large business based downtown and you've got 300 employees and a third of them are never coming back, do you really need 20,000 square feet of office space? I think that's a real challenging question that's going to have to be addressed at some point, and you're maybe not going to feel the full effect of it right away, because a lot of the impact is going to be felt when lease renewals come up. And, you know, when, you know, a large company has to renew its lease and they go from 20,000 square feet to 10, that's going to create a vacuum in the market. And we may end up with an oversupply of office real estate at some point. I think that's a real concern that people need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Nick, thank you very much for your time. Jim, thank you very much for yours. Dr. Raymond, always good to have you, and we look to have you back next Tuesday. And we will produce an upcoming set of programs, again, really focused on the challenges and opportunities to keep this region globally competitive, make sure we have high value jobs that support a vibrant quality of life for all. So appreciate all of you taking time to join us today with your insights. And we look forward to seeing our viewers back next Tuesday from 11 to 12. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.